Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Digital and IT Transformation, a formula for empowerment in the digital age. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Dennis Drogseth, VP of Research at Enterprise Management Associates. Dennis brings over 30 years of experience in various aspects of marketing and business, planning for service management solutions. He supports EMA through leadership in business service management, CMDB systems, automation systems, and service-centric financial optimization. And before I hand things over to Dennis, I did want today's audience to know that you can log your questions at any time throughout the course of the presentation by using the Q&A functionality. Dennis does have a lot of research to present. If for some reason we are unable to get to your question, I will go ahead and send those on to Dennis and he will reply to you. So I hope you take advantage of that opportunity. Also, today's event is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA tomorrow that will include the on-demand playback as well as some additional resources. So be on the lookout for that. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Dennis Drogseth. Dennis?
Well, thank you, Raleigh, and thank you all for attending the webinar. This will be indeed a lot of content. I'd like to get started, though, by thanking our collaborator in this, the IT Transformation Institute, that was a great resource in both concept and focus in developing our thinking around how to approach this rather complex landscape. I'll also mention that Charlie Araujo, who's leading the Institute, has written a book called The Quantum Age of IT, which has also influenced some of the thinking here. I highly recommend it. Again, just sort of caveats for that. I also would like to thank my associate, Cecilia Kiley, who helped do some of the analysis with me, working with me. To tell you the truth, we are still looking at the data and we'll probably be still looking at the data for months to come because there's a lot of data to ponder. So before I go right into the agenda, I'd like to say a little bit about sort of setting the stage for this. There are some presentations that are step-by-step. You know, here's the 4 steps, generic steps to succeed in life. This is not quite that kind of a presentation. Then there are what I call, or someone actually called to me once, a landscape presentation, where you present a picture of a landscape and understand how that affects sort of the inhabitants, what's going on, where the trees are, where the stones are. That's a little bit closer to this, although we will be extracting a formula for success, I think, that emerges from this landscape, but it's a complex decision. This, I think, is really at a whole other level, even beyond that. This is multiple landscapes, folks, so it's many landscapes coming together with an attempt to understand the various dimensions of digital and IT transformation in a global context. And so, of course, we only have 45 minutes. I'll try to get through the highlights as best I can. We'll start with demographics, move through kind of summary idea of transformational histories and organizational perspectives. We'll look at technologies, transformational partners and metrics, at success, and that really is one of the key goals here, to share with you some of the characteristics of success for both IT and digital. And I will say this, the giveaway is a short summary of the research. It will not have all the content of the webinar, so I'll try to go slowly enough for you to look at some of the more complex data points. Also, it will be available online if you want to review it. And the full report, which does have all this content, will be available in the library. It's our EMA library if you want to go there. I also would like to thank our wonderful sponsors, without whom this would not have been possible: Blazent, Dynatrace, and Fluke Networks now with NetScout. They were also thought partners in this as well, and again, we wouldn't be here today without their support. So demographics. This is global that we reached out, as we'll look closer to that in the next slide. Over 300 respondents. We focused, I'm going to start with the right-hand side here, about 70% were IT and just a little under 30% business stakeholders. Because of the nature of this research, we targeted largely executive content, rather high levels of C-level for IT. We got 9% CEOs, and then a wide variety of other titles on the business side, corporate line of business director, customer success director, and that should read at the bottom, VP of e-commerce. So online and commerce and online communications were certainly a factor as well. So in sharing some of the business perspectives, I think you should be aware that one of the things that stood out was that business stakeholders tend to view themselves as twice as likely. Looking at the role-based landscape, and we'll have a few other data points on that in this. Business stakeholders were about twice as likely to see themselves as driving either an IT or a digital transformation initiative. Actually, it was fairly consistent across both fronts. So that's an interesting data point. Generally, the drivers came from the IT side in both areas. And that may seem like a question mark to you. We can examine that a little bit further as we go forward. So looking at the global landscape, we had about 150 plus in North America, a few from South America and Central, but then we had basically 75 respondents each from either Germany, France, and England and Europe, or Australia, China, and India in the Asia-Pacific area. And in terms of the global landscape, which will probably get the least attention in this call, the most successful group tended to come from North America. That might have been Optimism, or it might have been Reality, but they reported the highest level of success. And they were also the most likely to be further along in terms of involved with multiple initiatives. On the other hand, we had actually a fairly high level of sophistication from the Asia-Pacific arena in terms of number of technologies deployed. I was a little interested and surprised to see how progressive the APAC area is becoming. Dominant verticals. We look across, I believe, close to 30 different verticals, but the dominant 5 were clearly standouts above the rest: manufacturing, finance, and banking and insurance, high technology software, which is a little unusual, but given the topic, not that surprising, retail and healthcare. We had a pretty balanced distribution of company size, but a little bit skewed more to the mid-tier than the very low end, and we didn't go below 250 employees, which is kind of a different world. So the 1,000 to 10,000 employee area got sort of the biggest population. We were very fortunate, I believe, to get veterans. This was not research to look at companies that were not doing transformational initiatives. And there were a number of factors that lined up this way. For instance, the IT budget increase, which is generally a good sign. Percentage of increase in dollars for IT budget was much higher than the general rule when we do our research for this population. So we're looking at a progressive community already. And you could see that from here, 52% had been doing either IT or digital transformation for more than a year. So I was very happy to see that. So probably the obvious question sitting with most of you is, how do we approach this whole question of IT and digital transformation? How are they different and how are they similar? And we had to define them in the questionnaire, but we had to do it briefly. So we defined digital transformation as basically optimizing business and organization performance, leveraging digital investments, including, of course, the IT resources. And IT transformation is directed at transforming IT to be more effective in supporting basically business requirements, because that's the world of IT today. It's not an introverted, separate world. And digital transformation, we could spend a whole hour on just what that is. There are a lot of questions in the research that target different dimensions of digital transformation, whether it's brand awareness, whether it's business process efficiencies, whether it's revenue related, whether it's related to understanding consumer behaviors through transactions. A lot of data, and some of that will come out as we go forward. So this was the data we got back in terms of where they're focused. And I think it's not surprising. IT transformation has been around maybe a little longer. And I think one of the outstanding points that I'll want to mention throughout this is that IT and digital transformation, while they are in philosophically distinct in some ways, are also a critical handshake. And if you think you're going to do digital transformation without IT transformation through a magic wand or whatever, burning incense or whatever you're going to do, it just won't work. And I think the data supports the fact that common investments in the two pay off, and I'll be quite specific about that as we conclude. We did ask if anybody was using the terms interchangeably, and about 8% thought they were. Most of those actually came from, or the higher percentage came from the business community or the non-IT community. And we'll look a little bit at some of the high-level differences in just a couple of slides, 2 more slides, and then we'll revisit these throughout the research. So one of the areas that turned out to be very important for value was best practices, such as ITIL, COVID, and Scrum. And we saw that 79% in general were tied to best practices in some way or another. And so the salient benefits were, as you can see, fairly closely aligned. IT productivity was the dominant. And I should also share with you, the dominant best practices. We had ITIL would have been tops, but we listed it separately as both ITIL version 1 and ITIL version 2. So it didn't come out quite as tops. COVID scored high. We actually had a number of other areas that scored fairly high. They were actually fairly closely aligned across different best practice choices. And so again, I want to stress the fact that process and best practices, whatever the venue, was a critical resource for success. So now looking at some of the highlights and differences between digital and IT transformation, we'll revisit again some of these later on, but digital transformation from best practices was more likely to see benefits in terms of business outcomes, not surprisingly, reduced IT costs, and improved agility in delivering IT services. So if you go back to that prior slide for just a second, you can see those didn't score the highest, although IT costs was pretty high. But that, for a digital transformation, those got higher levels of attention than the general IT or the general population. We'll look at technology and all these other areas as well, and they're sort of landscapes in themselves. But it's interesting how aligned and how not aligned they were. In general, IT and digital transformation were more aligned than not, in surprising ways in some cases. But sometimes there were differences. For instance, in technology, IT transformation was more likely to look at analytics to capture impacts of IT services on business outcomes. And one of the reasons that's skewed, I think, to IT executives more is that's a lot of how they want to justify and show value to their business constituencies. Digital transformation prioritized analytics to capture customer and consumer behaviors and support creating enterprise workflows, so workflows to support facilities or HR within the enterprise. Again, not that surprising, that more of that customer outreach. In cloud and agile, IT transformation is more weighted to internal cloud, not surprisingly, than digital. Digital, a little more likely to see cloud as an accelerant to the transformational effort. And interestingly enough, and to require IT to reorganize, they saw that, and business stakeholders saw that as well as a priority. Some of that might reflect shadow IT, and some of that might reflect just a bit of impatience with IT to move forward into that brave new world of adapting to cloud. Also, digital transformation, in the one technology area, generally IT transformation was more progressed technologically, but in terms of Agile and DevOps, digital was more likely to have that in the works longer. In terms of partners, basically IT was more progressed, and more successful with its partnerships, and already had more established partnerships than digital. And in terms of metrics, and we'll look at this as also a flow throughout the presentation. Towards the end, we'll get to metrics. Digital transformation, interesting if you look at those two bullets there. Reduced war room time was a key operational metric for digital and the business stakeholders, whereas when you looked at the IT constituency, they defined that, which is a fairly parallel definition in terms of incident and problem management. And finally, business metrics in terms of digital transformation highlighted improved brand awareness, improved efficiencies across partners, suppliers, and service providers. Again, compared to IT transformation, whereas IT transformation was a little more focused on process efficiencies for their consumers, internal and external as well. Now, these are just a few of many, many different shades across these two areas, digital and IT transformation, but these are some of the more outstanding highlights, just so you get a feel for what we're looking at when we use these terms. So in terms of technology, one of the first things we wanted to do was discover to what degree technology investments were closely aligned with digital and IT transformation. And the answer was quite strikingly that they were. If you go down to the bottom, if I had to say in this eye chart that I'm sure will be hard to commit to memory in a few seconds, if you go down to the bottom, you see 1% that says our initiative was not linked to technology. That's a rather striking statement. In some ways, that might be the headline for this entire chart, and we'll dive into that a little more closely. Project management, not surprisingly, led, given the fact that all transformational initiatives need to be managed to some degree as projects with owners, and so that was natural. And workflow. Dialogue is going to be a big theme here, implied and sometimes directly, and workflow can support and enable and harden better ways of working together in dialogue. And interestingly enough, data quality management, quality of leveraging data, and this was true for both business and IT stakeholders, digital and IT transformation. Data quality is paramount. You'll see data integration right below social IT and social media. Another key area, and we'll be looking a little bit more here, again, we could spend hours just on the technology landscape, critical investments in app performance management and user and customer experience. In many ways, those are really critical drivers for digital and IT transformation. I was also a little surprised to see how strongly that the technologies were not only linked, but were actually drivers. So 70% of our respondents felt that these technology investments were drivers for their transformational initiative, and that wasn't all that different, and we'll see in the coming slide, between digital and IT transformation. So technology and transformation really do go together, in case you weren't sure. So we looked closely at terms of priorities, and we looked across functional or operational priorities. We looked with analytics and automation priorities, and we looked at business and analytics and visualization. And again, this is not surprising. When we looked at sort of core overall functional priorities, and this included some security as well, user and customer experience topped the list, and then application performance management. Now, of course, that makes sense from both an IT and a digital transformation. That's a transactional stage where the business and IT come together. Project management and automation for self-service came in third and fourth. And some of the deltas here, why was project management top of the list in the other slide? So project management is pervasive, but in terms of critical priority, user and customer experience was number one. Analytics for automation, workflow, of course, necessary. Governance, IT governance. How is IT performing? Who's doing what? How effectively are they doing it? What are the costs? What are the outcomes in terms of service quality, service value, and relevance? Then analytics for optimizing the application infrastructure, an area of huge growth and need that's still underserved in general by the industry, understanding advanced capacity analytics, especially with cloud, and of course configuration automation. For business analytics, keying on business outcomes, financial planning, analytics for IT service management efficiencies scored especially high in IT transformation, and executive dashboard for sharing IT and business insights. So I should mention now that both cloud and Agile did not score high when we looked at linked technologies, and yet they score very high. 85% view cloud as part of their initiative, and you'll see 74% for Agile. But what the difference was is that I don't believe they thought of cloud and Agile specifically in terms of technology linkages so much as resources or process initiatives or other kinds of initiatives because they're clearly very important for both digital and IT transformation. We looked at what kind of cloud deployments were out there, and the top were public software as a service. But then software-defined data centers came in second, which is interesting, surprising to me a little bit, but clearly a sign of progress in the cloud area, and then public infrastructure as a service. But overall, if we averaged it out, internal led external. And again, and these in terms of cloud investments related to the transformational initiatives. We looked at the top impacts of cloud. Number one was cloud as an accelerant, right, for transformation. Cloud is promoting more dialogue between IT and the business, and that really is, again, I'll hit on the word dialogue as one of the key parts, maybe the central story here. If I had to extract one word, it's going to be technology to enable better dialogue between IT and the business. Cloud has forced IT to reorganize, in some ways to become more cross-domain, less siloed, more service-aware, and more responsive to business needs. However, there were 15% of our respondents who saw cloud as more disruptive than helpful. So just moving to cloud by itself, if it's not done in the right way, is no guarantee for success. So as I mentioned, Agile and DevOps, we linked the two, and we actually did have a question, as you'll see right at the top. We asked, which are you primarily? Are you primarily DevOps, primarily Agile, or evenly focused on both? And you can see a little more on DevOps than Agile. We did not go into detail in terms of defining the two. And interestingly enough, we saw a lot of value in sharing a DevOps Agile mindset. Again, that has to do with you just don't need speed. You need efficiencies, and you need service quality, and you need resilience. It's interesting to see, for instance, to me that digital transformation, even more than IT transformation, prioritized DevOps as a requirement so that the services were consistent and performed well, and whereas IT transformation was more focused on getting their Agile act together, no doubt, and pressure from the business. 75% saw it as very critical. These initiatives as very critical to relevant to their transformation. The third bullet down, in some ways, might be the most important, especially when we look at the success numbers. 47% established formal teams between IT and the business. And for dialogue, again, dialogue between IT and the business. And that really is a truly critical requirement. So again, and they definitely lined up for success based on that. Interestingly enough, mid-tier enterprises were the furthest along in Agile, and you get probably the issues with politics in the large enterprise. I won't spend too much time on the partner landscape because we have 45 minutes and there's a lot to cover, but we did look closely at what kind of partners are prioritized, and this question was directed specifically at which partners have been so far affiliated with your transformational initiative. And you can see IT transformation specialists, the number one. That's not surprising. But it's interesting to see infrastructure hardware providers that skewed more to the IT stakeholder and the IT transformation. But perhaps the outstanding statement here is these are not usually different percentages overall as you scale down from 37 to 24. So it's a fairly balanced portfolio. Then you move down towards organizational consultants, business and enterprise consultants, process consultants. You needless to say, the digital transformation and the business stakeholders more likely to prioritize those partners. And going forward, I should say, it was interesting to see a shift to prioritizing application software management as the number one priority going forward, which is great for EMA's vendor community, and shows a move to say, okay, we've kind of thought this through a little bit. Let's go forward and embrace technologies. Spent a lot of time looking at metrics. We looked at them in different ways. In terms of operational metrics, we looked at them both in terms of what was pervasive and what was viewed as critical. The two are not always the same, as you can see. In fact, they're actually not the same in any of these three instances. The most pervasive operational metric was time to create and provision new services, whereas service performance and availability turned out to be the most critical. And again, that makes sense to me. If your services are nice to have them quickly, but if they're not there for you and they're not responsive and they're not relevant, the speed becomes secondary. Internal costs for delivering IT services was most pervasive, but ROI and total cost of ownership were viewed as the most critical, and of course the two are not unrelated. Business process efficiency impacts, when we looked at business metrics, scored the tops in terms of pervasive. But when we looked at what was absolutely prioritized as critical, it's actually dealing with that new ecosystem of IT, optimizing that business of partners and suppliers and service providers as a very real and pressing need. From an operational perspective, this is one of many, many charts that we've been looking at when we compare IT and digital transformation. You see how closely aligned they generally are. As you can see where the differences are, we highlighted earlier, orange, of course, is digital, and green is IT. And where there's the biggest difference, it's really almost a semantic discussion between reduced war room time, which is focused more for the digital and the business owner, and whereas IT viewed this more in terms of incident and problem management. The two are, of course, largely different sides of the same coin, especially as operations and the service desk move closely together. So we included security metrics as well. You can see, again, there's a broad range of choices, and largely they're not hugely different. The scores are fairly consistent across them all. So here on business metrics, there's a bit of a difference that's more significant, and this does make sense. Guess what? Digital transformation was more likely to target business metrics than IT transformation. Although the difference is not astonishing, it's significant, 320% to 295. And again, orange is digital and green is IT. if you were to look at these metrics sort of unified, that number one is, again, in terms of pervasive, as I mentioned, business process metrics. Second would be end user satisfaction metrics. Third would be customer satisfaction metrics. And then business end user productivity, okay? So the end user within the company becoming productive. But it really underscores that, again, that transactional stage story between the business and IT, where the performance of the business and the performance of IT come together. There are definitely mood swings, differences between both digital and IT transformation in terms of success and in terms of stakeholders between business and IT. So in terms of transformation, you can see a delta here. IT transformation felt they were 79% either very or extremely successful. And by the way, we generally get a bit of optimism when we ask these questions, whereas 69% of digital felt they were successful. We get even a bigger difference when we separate the IT stakeholders from the business stakeholders. And again, probably not surprisingly, 75% of IT thought they were successful, and 60% of business very or extremely. And of course, that also makes sense in terms of really optimizing business through IT is still very much uncharted grounds in many ways, and it's a very creative area, not to say that IT transformation is cut and dry. What were the key obstacles? In digital, so looking at these sort of the four landscapes here, digital transformation, lack of effectively defined processes, and poor communication across IT and lack of vision. We'll see also from, if you skip down to business stakeholders, lack of a clear and compelling vision was tied for first place. And I'll emphasize that it's clear from this data, to me anyway, that the business is looking for IT for vision and leadership. Whereas if you look at IT stakeholders and IT transformation, IT is struggling with organizational and political issues, largely internal to itself. We all know what these are like. We've been tracking them for years and working with IT organizations to support them. So business is looking for a visionary, and IT is looking to get its act together so that it can become visionary, hopefully. And then you can see poor communication registered under digital. Poor communication doesn't show up as much in the others, but it was a high score in general, and relates clearly to lack of leadership and silos, etc. So here's our little formula for empowerment and success. And these formula here are, they actually make sense. They're very strikingly make sense. The first one may not be so evident. We saw 50-50 partners between IT and business stakeholders in terms of who is driving the initiative as the most successful group. And once again, I'll suggest that's about dialogue. And then look at the sub-bullet. If you have a formally defined team to look at relevance, priority, and need for applications, you are eight times more likely to be successful. And that team is between, of course, IT and the business than other groups, than those who are not, who are somewhat successful, I should say. So we took the extreme to get the 8 times. So very extremely successful versus somewhat and just partially successful. Very dramatic difference. You're going to have more best practices. You're going to have more partners engaged. We'll look at the next slide on technology. You'll be more invested in technology, and you'll be more likely to leverage metrics. And we didn't show these, but we have slides on cloud metrics. And guess what? Extremely successful in digital and IT also had more metrics for measuring their cloud investments effectively. Looking specifically at technology, you have to love this progression. It's so clean. Extremely successful. We typically had 8 of the technologies that we showed in that initial slide on linkage. It started at the top with project and workflow. Very successful, had a little over 4.5. Successful in some areas, but not others. And actually, there's a typo in that. That should be 4.25, not 3.25. And then somewhat successful were 3.67. It's a perfect progression, excluding the typo there. Then we looked at what technologies were most dramatically and consistently different across those 4 successful groups. Those are not necessarily the most pervasive, as you may remember. These are not in any specific order. They were social IT and social media, application performance management, CMDB, CMS, or ADDM, the configuration management system, or app dependency and discovery, and data quality management were the 4 most telling between the extremely successful and those who weren't. And here I'd like to again underscore that value of what I think is an implied dialogue. If you look at the metrics for success, we looked at those groups who were basically shared digital and IT transformation. They were roughly 50-50 each. They did, in other words, approach it as a continuum. And they were clearly aligned with almost every metric associated with success. Although they were not yet more successful. The most successful group in terms of this was still primarily IT, because primarily IT is a more advanced area, more mature. So I believe that this highlights the need for dialogue yet again, and that shared handshake between digital and IT. So quick summary, digital and IT transformation are closely related and complementary. I think there are a lot of other data points I could show to support that, but I hope that you can take away this from this research. A necessary handshake rather than 2 separate worlds. In spite of all the buzz around digital, they really are a continuum. IT and business stakeholders are similar in many ways, but as you know, the business is a little less bullish about where success is today. They need vision. IT's mired in politics right now. And each group tends to favor itself as being more likely to be a driver. 79% were linked to best practices, strong votes for best practices. 94% had planned for industry partners in supporting transformation or had them. 73% saw technology as a driver, which is, again, very striking. Not just supportive, but as a driver. 85% focused on cloud, 74% on Agile and DevOps. And talking about success, which we just went over, that 50-50 partnership, that 8 times more likely if you've got a formally defined team than if the somewhat and only partially successful, and technologies, metrics, partner support, best practices, cloud, Agile, and DevOps. So before I take questions, and I'm hoping for just a few moments, I'd like to read the very conclusion of the report that is available, because I think it's something that I can't just speak to from the slides itself. As IT organizations are increasingly forced to compete with external options for digital services, they will need to become more adept at defining, delivering, and articulating the need for and the value of what they do. In other words, IT is becoming in its own right a product organization. This requirement was underscored by the need for vision and leadership, more service consumer-related insights, financial priorities such as improved efficiencies in dealing with partner suppliers and service providers. Indeed, the emergence of business teams willing to embark on this new digital dialogue with strongly service and consumer-aware IT organizations is reflective of a new vanguard in both digital and IT transformation. But to truly succeed, the teams will not only require smart and proactive adoption of key technologies, processes, best practices, partnerships, vendors, consultants, etc. They will also require courage. The courage for both business and IT leaders to get beyond traditional comfort zones and inbred habits of mind. Their future success may ultimately even require a new language in terms of concepts through which these fundamentally different cultural groups can learn to communicate more effectively and creatively together. with that, I'll wrap it up, and Raleigh, I'll turn it over to you for questions.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. First, I'm going to go ahead and jump back. I believe it was slide 19. There are a couple questions just to clarify. It may have been on this slide. If not, I apologize. But the first question is, please clarify WDYM by, quote, reduced war room time.
Well, it's time to resolve outages for services, basically, or applications. You know, when the war room is where, I hate to say traditionally, the apps folks, the network folks, the storage folks potentially, whatever, all get together in a room and point fingers at each other and say, it's not me, it must be you. And of course, the goal is to break that down, to have better analytics and vision around those problems and shared data, so the problem can be resolved more quickly and the business can go forward without losing revenue or whatever.
Thank you. I also had another question about this slide, and it is MOC meant to be part of project management?
I'm looking down for MOC here. And I tell you what, go on to the other question and let me look down for MOC to see. Oh, I see it. No, it's no, I've got you. I realize it's not something on the slide. Yes, MOC would be part of project management.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. I think we have time for one more question. I did want to let the audience know if Dennis did not get to your question, I'm going to send those on to him and he will respond. The final question, Dennis, let's take is, in terms of IT and business talent considerations, what's the most important things that you have learned, and what are the biggest surprises you have encountered regarding shifts in the portfolio of skills? I know that's kind of a bigger question, so maybe you can do a 10,000-foot view of that.
Okay. Yeah. 10,000 probably. So number one, within IT for sure, requirements to become more diversified in skill rather than a terribly narrow focus, and I've seen this over the last number of years, where you just want to use one tool, own one area in one silo, and stick to that and build your career around it. That is no longer the sort of Renaissance approach is becoming more needed. Cloud skills, and of course, there are unique skills evolving because of cloud and Agile that need to go forward. Another thing I would say, which is skill related in some ways, is IT traditionally, right, is not famous for its communication skills. If you look at some of the cartoon images of IT professionals. On the other hand, communication skills, whether it's within IT or cross IT, and certainly in the IT leadership, are becoming more and more important. And that also means communications between groups like operations and the service desk. Maybe for the space of time here, I'll stick to that, but there's, this could be quite a long conversation.
Yes, I thought so. We appreciate the questions. Again, I'm going to go ahead and send Dennis any unanswered questions. And to thank all of you for joining us today, you will be receiving a report summary from today's research that will be part of the follow-up email that will go out tomorrow. Your attendance in these events is what enables us to keep holding those. So thanks for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.